Dear listener, before I begin, I sincerely wish you happiness, love, and well-being. May your path be filled with bright moments, and may each new dawn bring warmth and hope. Today, I will share an event that changed my entire life. A story of pain, betrayal, and extraordinary rebirth. I remember that fateful evening as if it were playing out in slow motion. I quietly approached the bedroom, thinking that, as usual, everything in the house was calm. The door opened, and before my eyes unfolded a scene that would forever be etched in my memory. I saw him, my husband, naked, and next to him, an unfamiliar woman. It was a moment when the entire world seemed to freeze, and my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. That frame, like a terrible nightmare, became the turning point after which nothing could ever return to the way it was. In the first few seconds, I couldn't believe my eyes. Questions swirled in my head. How could he? Why now? Why like this? Each second stretched endlessly, and the sounds, the distant drip of a faucet, the quiet ticking of the clock, only heightened the feeling of an impending catastrophe. My body trembled, and my soul, as if teetering on the edge between life and death, searched desperately for salvation. How could such a tragedy begin? Memories transported me back to those distant days when everything seemed like a fairy tale. We met by chance on a narrow street where I, struggling with heavy bags, tripped. He immediately offered his hand, and his warm, tender gaze made me believe in miracles. From that moment on, we were inseparable. We dreamed together, made plans, laughed and cried, savoring every moment spent together. Our evenings were spent on a cozy terrace under the stars, where we whispered to each other about endless love, as if the entire world belonged only to us. But even in those cloudless days, there were subtle hints that our idyll harbored danger. The first warning signs appeared almost imperceptibly. Small changes in his behavior, random phone calls, delays at work, words spoken without sincerity. I tried to brush it off as fatigue or minor misunderstandings, but deep down, a feeling grew. Something was wrong. That evening, returning home after a long day, I already felt a slight unease, like a chill running down my spine. The house was enveloped in its usual silence, but in that silence, there were echoes of something left unsaid. The children were already asleep, and I, thinking everything was fine, headed to the bedroom. I could never have imagined that such horror awaited me beyond that door. Standing in the doorway, I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. My mind refused to accept reality, and my heart pounded so loudly that it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Flashes of memories, our first dates, warm embraces, promises of eternal love, crashed over me with incredible force. Every detail seemed like a lie I had once willingly accepted, believing in its sincerity. I remember how my hands trembled as I tried to take a step forward, as if trying to push myself away from this unbearable reality. Images flashed through my mind, nights filled with whispers of tender words, and moments when I felt that our world was an impenetrable fortress, safe from evil. But now that fortress had crumbled, and in place of warmth, there was only an icy void. I whispered softly, almost inaudibly, words that echoed in my mind. How could you? My husband, as if waking from a deep trance, turned sharply toward me. His eyes, filled with confusion, fear, and shame, met mine. In them, I saw both despair and a desire to somehow explain the irreparable. But the words that escaped his lips were nothing more than a helpless whisper. "I'm sorry, he began, but I could no longer hear him. From that evening on, everything changed. I was caught in a whirlwind of pain and questions that haunted me every minute. Every little thing in the house, every sound, reminded me of what had happened. The sound of the dripping faucet became a grim signal of fate, and the steady ticking of the clock marked the final moments of my old life. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in the search for the truth, gathering fragments of evidence to understand the full picture, rereading old messages and analyzing moments when his behavior seemed strange. I tried to piece together the mosaic of betrayal. Every detail, whether an unfinished phrase, a random text, or a strange phone call, became part of this horrifying portrait. I wrote everything down in a notebook, recording even the smallest nuances, because the truth was somewhere nearby and I had to find it. Sleepless nights filled with tormenting thoughts turned into a time of honest conversation with myself. The inner voice that had once been quiet and kind now sounded sharp and cold. Why didn't I notice this earlier? Where was my intuition, my inner voice that should have warned me? I was too busy dreaming of happiness to see the truth. I answered myself, and tears rolled down my cheeks, mingling with the pain of loss. One day, over a cup of hot tea with my close friend Katerina, as the rain tapped against the window, she quietly said, "Sometimes betrayal isn't just about a partner's infidelity. It's also about betraying yourself when you let blind faith overshadow reason." Those words struck a chord in my heart and made me wonder, had I allowed shadows to creep into our lives? Days turned into nights, and I continued to gather evidence, as if piecing together a puzzle to see the full picture. Every little thing, unfinished phrases, random texts, strange phone calls, added to the horrifying portrait of betrayal. Inside, I felt that I was on the brink of irreversible change. Every drop of pain, every betrayal, and every loss was leading me toward something new, toward rebirth, toward no longer being a prisoner of deception, but fear still lingered. The fear of being alone, of losing everything dear to me, the fear that my soul would never be whole again. One morning, sitting by the window in the cold light of dawn, I looked out at the city that had once brought me comfort. The wind gently touched my hair, and in the distance, I could hear the sound of rain, as if nature itself was crying with me. I realized that I could no longer live in illusions. The truth, like an icy knife, cut through my heart, but with that pain came the seed of a new life. That night, when everything seemed to be holding its breath before the storm, I lay in the dark and listened to my heart beating in sync with my thoughts. Each beat was an echo of lost love, and each drop of the night was a reminder of a past that could never be reclaimed. Yet, amidst it all, I felt a quiet but steady flame of hope. Hope that even from the deepest wounds, one could find the strength for a new beginning. I realized that I had to take control of my destiny, even if it meant walking through fire and water. In that moment, I understood that I could no longer be a victim of my own naivety and blind faith. I had to find the strength within myself to answer the most important question. Who am I, if not someone who can fight for her truth? Every detail of that night, every sound and every word will stay with me forever. And though the pain of betrayal changed me, it also became the spark that ignited my desire for freedom and independence. My mind was drowning in memories of how it all began. Every morning was filled with anticipation, every night with dreams of endless love. But deep inside, there was already a quiet unease, a barely perceptible whisper of a premonition that one day these perfect moments would turn into pain and disappointment. I remember meeting him in a small cafe on a cool, early spring morning. His smile, sincere and warm, seemed to warm me as the city was just waking up. We talked about simple things, books, music, dreams, and I felt that every encounter with him was magical. Back then, I couldn't have imagined that behind his charm lay subtle hints of future disappointments, that every word he spoke carried the seeds of lies. In those days, our communication was filled with tenderness and trust. He told me about his dreams, shared his plans, and I believed that our union was not a coincidence, but a gift from fate. In the evenings, walking along quiet streets, we made plans for the future, dreaming of a home filled with laughter and joy. Every moment seemed like a promise of eternity. But behind this idyll lurked an unknown shadow, a premonition I couldn't yet recognize. The first warning signs appeared gradually, like faint whispers in the night. One day, when he was late from work again, I sat at the dining table, feeling the darkness slowly closing in. His explanation sounded distant and cold, as if he had already prepared excuses in his mind before speaking them aloud. "You're late again?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though a hint of unease crept into my voice. "Just a lot of work," he replied, avoiding my gaze, as if afraid to see the reflection of his secrets in my eyes. From then on, I began to notice every little thing. Minor delays, brief messages, random phone calls at odd hours. One day, returning home in the rain, I accidentally overheard fragments of a conversation behind a closed door. Hiding in the shadow of the hallway, I caught a firm, confident voice. "Yes, I'll be there. Everything's under control." Those words, spoken so decisively, seemed to foreshadow events that would turn my world upside down. After that evening, I began to collect every little detail, writing down every word, every sound, every shadow of doubt in my diary. The entries became my refuge, my attempt to preserve at least a drop of truth in a world where everything seemed shrouded in illusion. Looking back on those days, I often ask myself, why did I so blindly believe in promises? Every morning, looking in the mirror, I tried to find answers in the reflection of the woman who once glowed with happiness. But now, deep inside, I began to realize I had been deceived not only by him, but also by myself, by my naivety, by my blind trust. In those moments when the night felt especially oppressive, I felt my heart screaming, "Wake up! Not everything is as perfect as it seems." But the fear of shattering this fragile world held me back from taking decisive action. It hurt to realize that every inconsistency in his stories, every random delay, was not just a minor detail, but a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to put together. And yet, piece by piece, the picture began to form, and I could no longer ignore it. One of the most painful moments was the discovery. A message I accidentally found on his phone, addressed to another woman. Words full of tenderness and promises challenged everything I had believed in. My heart ached, and I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, mingling with the rain tapping against the window. In that pain, I began to seek solace in the quiet whispers of my thoughts, in memories of times when love had seemed endless and unconditional. During such difficult moments, I turned to my friend Katerina for support. In a quiet corner of a cozy cafe over a cup of hot tea, she listened to my stories and spoke simple yet wise words. Sometimes, to find the light, you have to go through the deepest darkness. You deserve happiness, and no matter how painful it is, the truth is your first step toward it. Her words became a quiet beacon in the stormy ocean of my doubts, giving me the strength to move forward despite my fears and tormenting emotions. Every new detail I uncovered made my heart beat faster, not from joy, but from the sharpness of the pain. I began to analyze every moment of his presence, every word he spoke at any given moment. Sometimes I revisited our old photos, trying to find answers in the smiles that now seemed fake. Every smile, every glance became proof to me that behind the mask of perfect love lay the cold reality of betrayal. I spent long hours alone, wandering through the labyrinths of my soul. In the silence of the night, when everything seemed to stand still, I sat by the window, watching the raindrops tap against the glass, as if trying to tell me their tragic story. In those moments, I felt something new stirring in my heart, a strange but unquenchable flame of hope, promising that even from the deepest wounds, one could find the strength for rebirth. Fear, pain, disappointment, all of it became an integral part of my new world. I was learning to accept myself as I was, even if my soul was wounded to its core. Every morning, I woke up with the feeling that the world no longer belonged to illusions, that around every corner lurked a harsh truth. But it was this realization that gradually turned pain into determination, making me stronger than I had ever imagined. When dusk fell, I often took out my notebook, where I carefully recorded every detail, from random words overheard on the phone to the slightest changes in his tone. These notes became not just evidence of betrayal, but also proof that even in the darkest night, one could find a grain of truth. Every line, every mark I made was a step toward freeing myself from the chains of deception. I began to understand that love is not just warmth and joy, but also a test of strength. Every betrayal, every pain, every loss is a lesson that teaches us to be wiser, stronger, and more capable of loving ourselves. And though my heart was wounded, a ray of light began to break through, promising that something new awaited me, that life could offer a chance to start over. In this contradictory mix of emotions, I found myself more clearly. Each new day brought not only the pain of losing illusions, but also the understanding that the truth, no matter how bitter, is the path to personal freedom. To the sound of rain and the whisper of the wind, I learned to let go of the past, to accept the present reality, and despite everything, to move forward with faith in myself. And so, amidst the rustle of raindrops and the steady ticking of old clocks, I gradually found the strength to face the truth. I stopped fearing pain, for I understood it is through pain that true awakening is born. And in this quiet, almost imperceptible process, I began to realize that true strength lies not in hiding one's wounds, but in accepting them and learning to heal. Every little thing, every fragment of truth I found became a brick with which I began to build a new world. A world where I was no longer a prisoner of illusions, but the master of my own destiny. Standing before myself, I saw not only pain and betrayal, but also the beginning of something new, a quiet but steady strength capable of resurrecting me from the ashes of old dreams. This path was long and thorny, and I knew that I would have to endure many trials before the wounds would finally heal. But even in those moments, when my heart beat with particular intensity, I felt I was ready to accept the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. This chapter of my life became a turning point, a moment when the past, filled with sweet memories and invisible warnings, gave way to a new reality in which I was learning to be strong. Deep down, I already knew the truth, even if it cuts, gives us the opportunity to grow. And it was in this understanding, to the sound of rain and the steady ticking of old clocks, that I began to rebuild my life brick by brick, word by word, finding in each new day the spark that could ignite the flame of new hope. I couldn't stop thinking about that message, those words full of someone else's love, addressed not to me. They echoed in my head, shattering everything I had built in my heart. In that moment, I felt a wave of icy fear and despair wash over me, but I didn't cry. The pain burned me from within, but with it came a strange clarity. I couldn't just ignore this. I couldn't silence the unease again, hoping it would disappear. My heart knew. I was standing on the threshold of the truth. I began to gather facts. Opening my eyes every day, I noticed more details that had previously slipped past me. His phone was always with him. He turned off notifications, turned the screen away. Seemingly small things, but now they screamed at me about what I had been too afraid to admit. I began to notice how he tensed when I asked simple questions, how his answers became shorter, how he sometimes avoided meeting my gaze. But the most terrifying thing was his smile. Once, it had seemed the most sincere and warm. Now, I saw in it a hint of something foreign, as if he was smiling not at me, but at someone else, as if his thoughts were already far from our shared world. My first steps, I decided I wouldn't dive headfirst into emotions. I needed proof. For the first few days, I simply observed. I memorized, analyzed. I didn't want to believe in betrayal, but my mind demanded the truth. One evening, when he again said he was working late, I caught myself not believing a single word he said. I knew that if I wanted to uncover the truth, I would have to step over my own fears. A step into the unknown. My first impulse was to check his phone, but I knew he wouldn't leave it unattended. So I decided to take a different approach. I began analyzing his social media. Seemingly nothing unusual, standard posts, typical likes and comments, but something still felt off. I checked the accounts of those who appeared most frequently in his feed. I looked for coincidences, traces, the slightest clues, and I found it. A name, a recurring name in comments, likes, stories. A woman's name he had never mentioned. My fingers trembled as I clicked on her profile, and then I felt the ground give way beneath me. The photos that said it all. On her profile, I saw photos. Some were ordinary, trips, cafes, walks, but among them were those that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. Photos taken in places we had been together. Photos from the restaurant where we celebrated my birthday. Photos from the hotel where we once spent a weekend. I felt something inside me break. But what hurt the most was something else. In one of the photos, there was his hand. I recognized it immediately, the familiar bracelet I had given him. That detail was the final blow, the collapse of illusions. I could no longer deny the obvious. Every moment, every flash of happiness I had cherished, it had all been a lie. I looked at the photos and felt my world crumbling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, "How could you?" But instead, I silently closed the phone. What next? I didn't know what to do. Confrontation, a conversation, a silent departure. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but I knew one thing. I could no longer close my eyes. I had to decide what to do next, and I was ready for it. The night was sleepless. I lay in the dark, listening to my husband's breathing beside me. It felt as if the world was holding its breath. His calm, steady sleep cut through my heart. How could he sleep so peacefully after destroying everything we had built? I tried to imagine the moment he first decided to betray me. Was it a conscious choice? Or did it just happen, as he would later say? I knew one thing. I needed to hear his confession. But not today. Today, I would remain silent. The waiting game, I didn't want to make a scene. I wasn't going to turn into the hysterical woman he would later blame. I needed a strategy. I wanted to know how far this had gone, how long he had been lying to me. I decided that from now on, I would play the role of the perfect wife. No suspicions, no aggression. I would gather evidence until I was ready to strike. But I had no idea how hard this game would be, step by step, toward the truth. Over the next week, I did everything to gather more evidence. I checked his bank statements, gifts, restaurants, hotel payments. The dates matched his business trips. I installed an app to track his movements. It showed that he often visited the same area, one he had no reason to be in. I set up a meeting. One evening, he said he was working late. I showed up at his office unannounced. It was empty. Each new discovery was a blow, but with the pain came strength. Now I knew the truth. The first strike, I couldn't stay silent any longer. One evening, as he sat on the couch, engrossed in his phone, I sat down beside him and calmly asked, "How was your day?" "Fine," he replied, not even looking at me. "How was the office?" He nodded. "Same as usual, lots of work." I looked at him and felt anger boiling inside. Interesting. I pretended to think. "The office was closed today." He jerked his head up. "What?" The office was empty, I repeated. For a second, I saw his eyes dart to the side, frantically searching for an excuse. Yeah, he muttered. They let us go early. I see. I nodded. Where were you? He pretended not to hear the question. I leaned closer and, looking him straight in the eyes, repeated, Where were you? Silence hung in the air. The exposure. He took a deep breath, his face contorted. I saw two desires battling within him, to lie or to confess. I was with friends, he finally blurted out. I smirked. At a hotel? His eyes widened. He paled. What? At the hotel where you paid for a 2-night stay? He froze. I saw him realize the game was over. I took out my phone and opened the woman's profile, showing him the photos. You want to tell me this is also a coincidence? He swallowed, avoiding my gaze. It's not what you think. I laughed bitterly, nervously. And what do I think? Enlighten me. He reached for me, but I pulled away. No, I said firmly. Now it's my turn to speak. I stood up, feeling every cell in my body filled with strength. I know everything. I know who you were with. I know how long you've been lying to me. I know you never had a single business trip. He lowered his head. I'm sorry. Sorry? I scoffed. You didn't even try to hide it. You just thought I'd never find out, right? He didn't answer. You know, I looked at him with contempt. I used to be afraid of this moment, afraid I'd lose you. But now I just feel disgust. He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand, stopping him. Don't say another word. I turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind me. In that moment, I knew my journey with him was over, but ahead of me lay even bigger decisions. I entered the bedroom and closed the door behind me. No tears, no hysterics, just anger pulsing in my temples. I heard him remain seated in the living room. His breathing grew heavier, as if he was trying to process what had just happened, trying to figure out what to do next. But I had no doubts. It was over. The first hours after the exposure, I stood by the window and looked out at the night city. Strange. Just yesterday, it had felt cozy, familiar. Now, I felt like a stranger in this world. My phone vibrated. A message from him. Let me explain. I clenched my teeth. Explain? What was there to explain? Another message? I didn't mean for this to happen. I snorted. Of course. They never mean for it to happen, do they? It just happens. My phone vibrated again. Please, talk to me. I typed back just 2 words. Pack your things. And turned off my phone. His desperate attempts. The next morning, he didn't leave. I woke up to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen. He was sitting at the table. A second cup clearly meant for me. We need to talk, he said quietly. I walked past him without even looking. I love you, he continued. It was a mistake. I turned around. A mistake? I smirked. A mistake is when you accidentally put salt instead of sugar. You've been lying to me for months. I was a fool. You were a traitor. I interrupted. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling heavily. What can I do to make you forgive me? Disappear, I said flatly. He looked up at me. Do you really want me to leave? Yes. He slowly nodded. Okay, if that's what you want. But I saw the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't planning to just walk away. He was hoping I'd change my mind. How wrong he was. The plan for revenge. When he finally left for work, I knew this was my chance. I took out his laptop. I had known his passwords for a long time, and I logged into his email. What I found there made me freeze. Messages. Dozens. No, hundreds. Different women. And not just one mistress. There were several. I closed the laptop, feeling my heart clench with disgust. I wasn't just living with a traitor. I was living with a man for whom infidelity was a way of life, and I wasn't going to let him go so easily. The final blow I made, copies of all the correspondence, and I sent them to his parents and to his boss, to his friends, and of course, to all his mistresses. Last, I sent him a message. Now you know what it feels like to be betrayed. Within minutes, my phone exploded with calls. I didn't answer a single one. I simply packed my things, called a taxi, and left. That chapter of my life was over. I realized one thing. If someone betrays you once, they'll do it again. And you know what? I don't regret it, because I came out of it stronger. And if you ever find yourself in such a situation, don't stay silent. Don't forgive. Life is too short to waste it on traitors.